I made my stepdaughter CEO of my company, and the first thing she did was to fire my son. She said, "We need capable hands, and your son clearly isn't." I didn't say anything and was observing her. After 2 weeks, I overheard her in a conversation saying, "Very soon, that fool will no longer have a company but a mountain of debt." What happened next was rather unexpected. I will tell you everything. First, let me quickly thank you for your continuous support. This means a lot to us. If you enjoy the stories we share, kindly subscribe to this channel. It will be great if you can leave a comment on which city you are watching from. We might just give you a shout-out in our next story. Today's special shout-out goes to Sam Jonah from Chicago. We are glad you enjoy our stories. Now let's go deeper into the story. I always thought legacy was something you built with your bare hands and left behind for the ones you love. I never imagined it would become a weapon aimed right back at me. My name is Richard Elmore, and for over 30 years, I ran Elmore Technologies, a mid-sized software company I built from scratch in my garage while balancing 2 jobs and barely enough sleep to function. Through crashes, booms, and more than a few failed partnerships, I pushed through. I watched the company become something I could finally be proud of, something with weight and value. By the time I turned 55, I'd started easing myself out, hoping to enjoy the fruits of my labor. That's when I made the decision I'll regret for the rest of my life. I handed the keys of my kingdom to my stepdaughter, Leah. Leah was everything I wasn't at her age: polished, articulate, MBA from a top school, a knack for reading a room and bending it to her will. She was the kind of person who could charm investors with a 10-minute pitch and leave them throwing money her way. I'll admit, I was impressed by her from the start. When I married her mother, Elaine, 10 years ago, Leah was in college and already talking like she was running a Fortune 500. She called me Rick instead of Dad and made it clear she didn't need a father, just an ally. I didn't mind. I thought maybe that was how strong women operated: clear lines, firm goals. She didn't want hugs or bedtime stories. She wanted strategy sessions and access to my boardroom. And eventually, I gave it to her. At the time, it felt like the right move. My son, Drew, had been working at Elmore for 5 years by then. Quiet, methodical, the kind of guy who triple checks a line of code even when he knows it's right. He wasn't flashy or aggressive. He didn't network well, didn't care for the politics of the office. But he was loyal, and he believed in the work. I think a part of me always hoped Leah's sharpness and Drew's steadiness would complement each other. I imagined them as a team. Young blood and old-school ethics, taking the company further than I ever could. That was the fantasy. The reality hit fast, and it hit hard. I still remember the day I called the executive team into the boardroom and announced that I was stepping back and Leah would be stepping up as CEO. The room went still. Leah beamed like she'd just won an Oscar. Drew stared at me like I'd just slapped him. I didn't look at him. I told myself he'd understand eventually. It's just business, I told myself. You're building a future for the company, not playing favorites. That was the line I repeated, over and over. Even when Elaine kissed my cheek that night and whispered, "She's going to make you proud." Even when Drew avoided me at the office for the next few days. I stayed quiet. I watched. I waited. Looking back now, I can see the cracks were already forming. Leah came in like a wrecking ball. Scheduling late-night meetings, changing vendors without notice, laying off long-time staffers with emails that read like performance reviews. She said all the right things to the board: optimization, agility, cutting edge, but I could feel the soul of the place shifting. The warmth, the camaraderie, the sense of shared mission that had once defined Elmore. It was bleeding out, and in its place was a cold, calculated efficiency. Leah didn't want a team. She wanted an army that answered only to her. Then came the bombshell. Just 1 week into her tenure, Leah called Drew into her office. I wasn't there, but I got the report later from our HR head. She told him he was being let go. "We need capable hands," she said flatly. "And your son clearly isn't." That's what she told me later, when I confronted her, half-heartedly, gently, like a man asking why someone scratched his car instead of why someone set fire to his home. She didn't flinch. She said it was a business decision. Drew, for his part, left without a word. No scene, no outburst. Just gathered his things and walked out the same door he'd walked through for 5 years. I didn't say anything. Not then. Not even when Elaine defended Leah's decision at dinner. claiming Drew wasn't ambitious enough anyway. I nodded, chewed my food, drank my wine, and stayed silent. But inside, something shifted. I started coming into the office unannounced. I reviewed memos she thought I wouldn't see. I watched her more closely. Not like a father figure, not like a mentor, but like a man circling something that might be dangerous. I didn't want to believe it. But something deep in my gut, the same gut that had carried me through 3 decades of business, told me I had made a mistake. I told myself I was just being paranoid. That letting go was part of growing older. That Leah was just young and bold and making tough calls. But I couldn't stop watching her. Couldn't stop hearing the sound of Drew's quiet footsteps leaving that day. Couldn't stop feeling like I had let a fox into the henhouse. And that fox, I feared, wasn't just hungry. She was hunting. The silence that followed Drew's departure clung to the hallways like fog. People noticed, of course. No one said it aloud, but the absence of my son, his calm demeanor, his quiet consistency left a vacuum. The developers whispered in corners. The project leads avoided eye contact with me. And even the janitor, old Marvin, paused one morning as I passed and muttered, "Shame what happened to the boy." I nodded and kept walking. I didn't have the strength to explain myself. I told myself this was leadership. Sometimes you had to let your own bleed for the bigger picture. But the image of Drew packing his things into a cardboard box, shoulders stiff with the weight of humiliation, haunted me more than I cared to admit. I should have called him, should have sat across from him, father to son, and explained what I'd done and why. But every time I picked up the phone, I froze. What could I say? That I let a 28-year-old woman with a killer instinct and a diploma talk me into tossing him aside? That I watched it happen and said nothing? That I chose peace in my marriage over truth in my company? I didn't have the words. So I told myself he needed time. I told myself he was resilient. I told myself I'd fix it, eventually. Meanwhile, Leah settled in like a queen on a throne, her confidence swelling with every unchecked move. She started holding executive meetings without me. They weren't technically unauthorized. After all, I had named her CEO, but the exclusion stung all the same. At first, she'd send me summaries afterward, cheerful emails peppered with bullet points and phrases like streamlining our pipeline and pushing for faster monetization. But soon, even those stopped. I'd walk past the glass conference room and see her seated at the head of the table, laughing with the CFO, gesturing smoothly as if she'd been born into power. And I who built the damn table they sat around, became a ghost in my own house. Elaine, of course, defended her at every turn. "She's just doing what you trained her to do," she said one evening as we sat on the porch. "You wanted her to take charge. She's taking charge." I wanted to tell her that wasn't the issue. That taking charge didn't mean bulldozing everything in sight. That leadership wasn't cruelty dressed up in corporate lingo. But I bit my tongue. Marriage had taught me a lot. Most of all, when to stay quiet. I loved Elaine. I truly did. But when it came to Leah, her judgment blurred like watercolor in rain. That was her daughter, her only child. She saw potential where I now saw fire, and she wasn't about to put it out. The changes came faster after that. Leah replaced our longtime legal counsel with a slick-talking firm out of New York. More aggressive, she said, as if that was the same as effective. She let go of our head of HR, a woman who'd been with us since the early days, and brought in a consultant who spoke in buzzwords and smiled too much. Budgets were reallocated. Projects axed. Benefits trimmed. And through it all, Leah smiled and told the board it was necessary restructuring. They nodded, impressed with her confidence. No one questioned her. Why would they? The stock was stable. The numbers, on the surface, were holding. But beneath that surface, I could feel something shifting, something subtle and dangerous. It wasn't just the layoffs or the meetings or the budget changes. It was the way she looked at people, like they were assets, not individuals. The warmth was gone. Even when she greeted me, there was a chill in her tone, a distance I couldn't place. And when I tried to bring it up, to suggest maybe she'd moved a little too fast, that perhaps she should slow down, she'd smile that thin, practiced smile and say, "Rick, you asked me to lead. Let me lead." The arrogance was subtle, almost admirable in its polish. But to me, it rang with warning. One afternoon, I walked past her office and saw her laughing with 2 men I didn't recognize. Later, I learned they were consultants from a firm with ties to a competitor. That didn't sit right with me. I asked her about it, and she brushed me off. Just exploring options, she said. Nothing binding. You have to keep your eyes open in this climate. I nodded, pretending to understand. But that night, I barely slept. My instincts, honed over decades of backroom deals and sleepless strategy sessions, were screaming. Something was off, but I still hesitated, still hoped I was wrong. Then came the staff party, or rather, what used to be a staff party. Every year, we held a summer get-together at a lakeside retreat, a tradition dating back to when the company was just me and a handful of engineers. It was our way of saying thank you, of being human. This year, Leah canceled it. Unnecessary expense, she said, sipping a cocktail during a budget meeting. The room laughed. I didn't. I stared at her, wondering if she even remembered why we did it in the first place. She didn't care. That much was clear. She was cutting away everything I had built, piece by piece, and no one was stopping her. Not even me. I started staying later at the office, even though I had no official reason to. I walked the halls, talked to the junior staff, asked questions I already knew the answers to. I watched Leah's decisions ripple through the company like stones in water, first quiet, then widening, then unsettling everything they touched. I kept a file of things that felt off. Sudden account closures, a contractor hired without proper vetting, a quiet memo about transferring funds. I didn't act on it, not yet. But I was watching. Closely. Carefully. And the more I watched, the more convinced I became that this wasn't just ambition. It was something darker. Something personal. Still, I said nothing. Because part of me, perhaps the weakest, most frightened part, still hoped I was wrong. Still wanted to believe that this woman I had trusted, this daughter I had never quite called my own, was simply finding her way. That I was overreacting. That the cost of progress was discomfort. But deep down I knew. The first cut had already been made. And it wouldn't be the last. It happened on a Thursday. I hadn't planned to be at the office that day. Elaine and I were supposed to drive up to the cabin for a long weekend. But an early morning call from our accountant changed that. Something about an unusual transaction that needed my approval. A six-figure transfer to a new consulting partner I hadn't heard of. I told Elaine to go ahead without me. She gave me a look, the kind that holds more questions than words, but didn't argue. "Don't work too late," she said softly before she left. I nodded, kissed her forehead, and watched her drive away, wondering why my stomach had started to feel like it was tied in knots. I arrived around noon and went straight to the finance wing. The head of accounts, James, walked me through the transfer, assuring me it was part of an agile pivot Leah had mentioned in the last leadership summit. His words were careful, but his eyes darted like a man trying not to be caught in the middle. He handed me the file, and I thanked him, though I already knew I wasn't going to sign off on anything until I understood what the hell was going on. I headed back to my old office. Still mine in name, though I rarely used it, and started digging. The numbers didn't lie, neither did the timing. And what I saw confirmed what I had been too afraid to admit. Leah wasn't leading the company forward. She was hollowing it out from the inside. By 4 o'clock, I needed air. I walked down the hall, past the break room, past the new motivational posters she'd plastered everywhere. Disrupt. Innovate. Win. And toward the rear offices. That's when I heard her voice. Leah. Clear, sharp, laughing. The door to the small conference room was ajar. I don't know what made me stop, curiosity, instinct, or maybe just the sheer oddness of hearing her laugh so freely, but I stepped closer, quietly. She was on the phone, pacing. I recognized the cadence of her sales pitch immediately, but it was what she said next that made my heart stop. 2 more weeks, max. The fool still thinks I'm scaling. He doesn't see the drain at all. When I'm done, he won't have a company. He'll have a mountain of debt and no idea how it happened. I didn't breathe. I didn't move. I felt like a statue carved in ice. Her voice was light, almost giddy, like she was describing a prank she'd pulled on a high school teacher, not the slow murder of the man who trusted her with everything. By the time he figures it out, she went on, we'll already be on the other side. New brand, clean slate, no strings. I'm not going to babysit his legacy for the rest of my life. I backed away slowly, quietly, my footsteps soundless on the carpet. My hands were trembling. I walked back to my office, shut the door, and sat down, staring at nothing. The betrayal crashed over me in waves. First disbelief, then rage, then the dull, aching sorrow of recognition. I had given her everything, and she had taken it with a smile, only to turn around and plan my professional execution. She had looked me in the eyes, called me her mentor, hugged me at family dinners. And all the while, she was sharpening the knife. I stayed in that chair for an hour, maybe more. I replayed the words in my head until they etched themselves into my bones. The fool still thinks I'm scaling. It wasn't just business. It was contempt. Personal. Calculated. I wanted to storm down the hall, rip open the conference room door, and drag her out in front of everyone. I wanted to yell, accuse, demand answers. But I didn't. Not yet. I learned long ago that anger burns fast and loud, but silence cuts deeper. Instead, I opened my drawer, pulled out a flash drive, and started copying files. Emails, contracts, transfers, audio recordings from board calls, anything that smelled off. Anything that confirmed what I now knew in my gut to be true. It was nearly midnight by the time I left. I didn't sleep. I sat in my living room with the lights off, phone in hand, going over the evidence again and again. I could still hear her voice, smug and certain. She thought she'd won. Thought I was some tired old man, clinging to his past, too sentimental to see the dagger at his back. But she was wrong. I hadn't survived 3 decades in business by being naive. I had been patient. Too patient, maybe, but no more. The moment she called me a fool, she wrote her own ending. The next morning, I made 3 phone calls. First, to my lawyer. Then, to our internal auditor. Finally, to the police. I handed over everything. Every file, every document. I told them what I heard, what I suspected, what I now knew. There was no hesitation in my voice. No second guessing. I watched their expressions shift from curiosity to concern to confirmation. They promised to move quickly. I told them to do whatever they had to. I didn't care about the headlines, the gossip, the fallout. I wanted the truth out. I wanted her gone. By noon, they came for her. I stood in the lobby as the officers let her out. She looked shocked at first, confused, then furious. "What the hell is this?" she snapped, eyes darting toward me. "Rick? What the hell is going on?" I didn't say a word. I just watched. Her mother arrived shortly after, panic written all over her face. She clutched my arm, begged for an explanation, but I couldn't even look at her. All I saw was the daughter she had raised, cold, cunning, ruthless, and I realized something terrifying. Maybe Elaine had known all along. Or worse, maybe she had chosen not to see it. We stood there in silence as Leah was driven away. The company floor was quiet, stunned. I turned and walked to my office, closed the door, and finally exhaled. It wasn't victory I felt. It wasn't even relief. It was grief, the grief of a man who had trusted someone he shouldn't have, who had confused ambition with loyalty, who had mistaken a smile for sincerity. I knew the worst was yet to come. But I also knew one thing with absolute certainty. I had made the right call. The morning after Leah's arrest, the entire building felt like it had been wrapped in cotton, soft, muffled, distant. No one knew what to say. Whispers floated through the halls like smoke, and every set of eyes that met mine carried the same question. What happens now? I didn't have an answer. Not one that made sense. Not one that fit neatly into a press release or a board memo. All I knew was that a betrayal of that magnitude didn't leave clean edges. It tore through everything. Trust, reputation, even blood. I sat at my desk, staring at the stack of messages piling up in my inbox. Reporters asking for statements, legal firms offering representation, board members demanding emergency meetings. But beneath all that noise, what I kept hearing, what I couldn't stop hearing, was her voice from that room, dripping with disdain, calling me a fool. Elaine showed up at the office just after noon. She hadn't called ahead. I didn't even know she was coming until my assistant knocked once, opened the door, and whispered, "Your wife's here." I nodded slowly. "Send her in." Elaine looked like she hadn't slept. Her hair was unbrushed, face bare, eyes puffy and rimmed red. She walked into the room like it might collapse beneath her feet. I stood but didn't move to hug her. We just looked at each other, 2 people on opposite sides of a wreck they never imagined. "She's in jail," she said flatly, as if I didn't already know. You called the police on my daughter, Richard. On our daughter. I clenched my jaw. She's not our daughter, Elaine. She's your daughter. And she tried to destroy everything I built. She wouldn't. She started, then stopped. Her voice cracked, and she sank into the chair across from me. You could have talked to me. We could have handled this as a family. No, I said, and my voice sounded foreign to my own ears, colder, harder. This isn't a family squabble. It's criminal. She siphoned money, buried contracts, and tried to collapse the company from the inside. This wasn't a mistake. This was a plan. She admitted it. Elaine's hands trembled in her lap. She's been under a lot of pressure. Maybe she felt overwhelmed. Maybe she didn't mean, she meant every word. I snapped, louder than I intended. I heard her, Elaine. She said I'd be left with a mountain of debt, that I was too stupid to see it. She laughed about it. I paused, drawing in a slow breath, trying to pull back the storm in my chest. She wasn't overwhelmed. She was calculating. Elaine shook her head slowly, the disbelief unraveling in real time. She's my little girl. I can't believe she'd do this. Not to you. Not to us. And there it was. The fault line. The fracture that had always existed beneath our marriage. Invisible until pressure made it split wide open. I realized in that moment that I had been married to two people all these years, the woman I loved, and the mother who could never see her child as anything but innocent. I stood by the window, watching the sun cast long shadows over the parking lot below, and said, "You don't have to believe it, but you need to understand it, because I'm not going to pretend anymore." Elaine rose slowly, her voice quieter now. "What are you going to do?" "Let the law handle it," I said without turning around. "Let the board see the evidence. Let the investors make their calls. I'm not hiding anything. Not for her. Not for you." She didn't argue. Just stood there, motionless, then walked out the door and didn't look back. The sound of it closing behind her was like a judge's gavel, final, sharp, echoing. The fallout came fast. By Friday, the story had broken. CEO arrested in fraud scandal, family business implodes. News vans parked across the street. Reporters called my home. The board called an emergency vote and suspended Leah indefinitely, appointing me as interim CEO while the investigation unfolded. It was supposed to be temporary, but I knew it would last. No one wanted to go near that fire again. Drew returned to the office the following week. He walked in like a man testing the strength of a bridge that had already collapsed beneath him once. I met him in the lobby. For a moment, neither of us said a word. Then he sighed and muttered, "I didn't think I'd be back here." I nodded. "I didn't think you'd want to." "I don't," he admitted. "But I figured you could use someone who actually gives a damn." That was the first time I smiled in weeks. He didn't ask for a title. Didn't ask for an apology. He just rolled up his sleeves and got to work. Quietly, steadily, just like before. Watching him reclaim his place, not out of pride but out of sheer principle, made something in me ache. Not just regret, though that was part of it, but shame. I had doubted him, replaced him, let him be humiliated for nothing. I wanted to say I was sorry, to offer words that could rewind the past. But all I could manage was this: "Thank you." He gave me a tired smile and said, "Just don't let it happen again." The days bled into each other after that. Legal documents, audits, emergency board meetings. Every file Leah had touched was combed through. Her schemes weren't even subtle: shell vendors, fake marketing expenditures, kickbacks to consultants that didn't exist. She'd gutted us slowly, methodically, right under my nose. I kept thinking about all the times I defended her. All the dinners, the holidays, the moments where I let her wear trust like a costume. And now? Now I was cleaning up the mess with my own son at my side, while my wife, soon-to-be ex-wife, refused to return my calls. I got the papers a few days later. Divorce. Elaine didn't even write a note. Just signed, filed, and left a forwarding address. I stared at the envelope for a long time, wondering if love had ever stood a chance between us. If we were ever really a family. Or if we had just been holding on to a version of hope that was never real to begin with. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I just poured myself a drink, sat on the edge of my bed, and let the silence settle. The company would survive. Drew and I would rebuild. But what I lost, could never be charted on a balance sheet. And somehow, that hurt most of all. There's a strange kind of quiet that settles after the storm passes, a stillness that feels less like peace and more like ruin. That was the mood in the office in the weeks following Leah's arrest. The chaos had slowed, the headlines had shifted to newer scandals, and yet something heavy still hung in the air. A weight no one wanted to name. The kind of grief that doesn't show itself in tears, but in the way people speak softer, walk slower, and avoid certain hallways. Leah's office sat untouched, its glass walls a constant, mocking reminder of how close I had come to losing everything. People averted their eyes as they passed it, like a tomb in the middle of a church. No one dared go inside. Not even me. The investigation had concluded with brutal clarity. Leah had embezzled just over $2.3 million across multiple fronts. Shell companies, false bonuses, and a few discreet kickbacks to outside parties who had already scattered once the police got involved. The funds were unrecoverable. The auditors said she'd been laying the groundwork months before I even handed her the reins. That part cut the deepest. Not just what she did, but how long she had been planning it. How deliberate it all was. There was no moment of desperation, no financial crisis. Just greed. Cold, measured greed, dressed up in business casual and boardroom smiles. Drew kept showing up. Every morning, without fail. He was never loud about it, never demanded anything. But his presence alone was like an anchor. We started having lunch together again, not talking much at first. Just eating in the same room, watching the city pass by through the windows. Then one afternoon, he looked up from his sandwich and said, "She tried to kill it, you know. The whole damn company." I nodded slowly. "I know." He set his sandwich down and leaned back. I kept thinking about that day she fired me. How calm she was. Like it was routine. Like I was a piece of bad software she was debugging. I swallowed hard, shame crawling up the back of my throat. I should have stopped it. He shrugged, but there was no forgiveness in the gesture. "You didn't." I didn't defend myself. I didn't tell him I was trying to keep peace in the family, or that I had wanted to believe in Leah's vision. Those would have been excuses, and he deserved better than that. He deserved honesty. "I let you down," I said quietly. "And I'm sorry." He didn't say anything for a long time. Just stared out the window, his expression unreadable. Finally, he sighed and said, "I know." But the words weren't harsh. They were just tired, like a wound that had already stopped bleeding. Meanwhile, Elaine had gone silent. She'd moved out of the house a few days after serving the divorce papers, taking only what she needed. No angry voicemails, no dramatic confrontations. Just silence. That was what surprised me most, not the end itself, but the lack of fight. I kept waiting for her to call, to scream at me, to demand I take everything back. But she didn't. Maybe she knew there was nothing left to say. Or maybe, like me, she had already mourned the marriage long before it officially died. I found myself thinking about the early days of our relationship, back when Leah was still in college and Elaine and I were just two people trying to make something work. We were happy then, or at least, we believed we were. She'd bring Leah home for the holidays, and I'd try too hard to be the kind of man a young woman would admire. Leah never asked for that, never wanted it, but I offered it anyway. Maybe I was trying to rewrite something with Drew, to be more involved this time, more supportive. Maybe I saw in Leah's drive the kind of fire I never had in my youth, and I wanted to nurture it. What a cruel joke that turned out to be. One night, weeks after everything unraveled, I walked into Leah's old office. The air was stale, still holding her perfume, and the shelves were lined with books she probably never read. I sat in her chair, let my fingers brush over the desk where she plotted my downfall, and for the first time, I felt a kind of numbness I couldn't explain. It wasn't sadness or anger. It was the cold realization that everything I'd done, every compromise, every moment of silence, had led to this. I had built the stage for my own humiliation and invited the audience in. I pulled open the desk drawers, half expecting to find something, notes, letters, anything that could explain her mindset. But it was all empty, clean, sterile, like she'd never intended to stay long. Maybe that was the plan all along. Get in, drain what she could, and leave me with the wreckage. She hadn't just wanted to succeed, she wanted to burn my legacy down in the process. And that was the part one still couldn't make peace with. The staff slowly began to normalize. Meetings resumed. Deadlines were enforced. Investors, those who hadn't pulled out, received updated reports and projections. We were back in the black, thanks largely to Drew and a few loyal department heads who refused to let the company crumble. But there was no joy in the recovery. No sense of victory. Just necessity. Like survivors rebuilding after a fire, knowing the new walls would never quite smell right again. I stopped going home. My house felt like a mausoleum, every picture frame a lie, every room filled with ghosts. I moved into a small apartment across town, minimalist and cold, but clean. It gave me distance. It gave me quiet. But it didn't give me peace. That was gone. Maybe for good. I didn't tell anyone I'd moved. Not even Drew. It felt easier that way. Cleaner. I needed time to process, to recalibrate, to figure out who I was now, stripped of all the roles I'd worn for so long: CEO, husband, stepfather. I wasn't any of those things anymore. I was just a man who trusted too easily and paid the price. One night, sitting alone in that empty apartment, I pulled out an old family photo. Thanksgiving, maybe 8 years ago. Me, Elaine, Drew, and Leah, all around the table. Everyone smiling. I stared at Leah's face for a long time. She was smiling too, but her eyes were already somewhere else. I went back to the cabin in late spring. The same one Elaine and I used to escape to on long weekends, where Leah once insisted on bringing her textbooks, and Drew quietly fished off the dock while pretending not to eavesdrop on the rest of us. It hadn't been touched in months. Dust settled on the countertops, and the place smelled like cedar and silence. I left my phone in the car. Didn't want notifications, didn't want updates. The company was in Drew's hands for the week. He'd earned that trust. I needed space. Not to escape, but to face everything I had avoided feeling during the chaos. The betrayal. The collapse. The strange, slow rebirth that followed. I sat on the porch that first evening with a bottle of scotch and an old wool blanket, watching the water move like breath beneath the sunset. The quiet wasn't comforting. It was confrontational. It pressed against my chest, demanding answers I didn't have. What kind of man hands his life's work to someone who never earned it? What kind of father sacrifices his son's dignity to keep the illusion of family unity? What kind of husband fails to see the fracture in his marriage until it tears everything apart? I didn't have neat answers. Only fragments. Regret shaped like memories. Love twisted by loyalty. The stubborn hope that maybe, just maybe, I could build something solid out of broken parts. I replayed Leah's voice in my head, that final cruel sentence still echoing like an old injury. That fool will have a mountain of debt. It wasn't just the malice in her tone, it was the ease. The way she said it like a joke, like I was nothing more than an obstacle in her way. I tried, briefly, to understand her. To imagine what drove someone to hollow out the hands that fed them. Was it resentment? Some long-nurtured bitterness I never saw? Or was it entitlement, pure and simple? I would never know. She hadn't reached out. Not once. No letters. No apology. Just a prison cell and a public record that would follow her for the rest of her life. And still, part of me, some wounded, ridiculous part, ached for her to say something. To acknowledge what she'd done. But she never did. Elaine didn't speak to me again. I sent her a letter once, short, quiet, not angry. I told her I hoped she was well, that I didn't blame her for loving her daughter, that I understood. I never heard back. I suppose that was her answer. I think, in the end, she saw Leah's downfall as my doing. Not because I was wrong, but because I acted. Because I shattered the illusion we'd both clung to. She couldn't forgive me for that, and I couldn't fault her for it. People hold on to lies when the truth is too heavy. I know I did. The company survived. Somehow against the odds. We lost a few investors, yes. Lost some reputation too. But Drew, God, that boy held us together. His quiet leadership, his refusal to gloat, to say, "I told you so," it steadied the ship in a way I never could have. Watching him grow into the kind of man I had hoped to be, not the one I actually was, gave me something unexpected, pride without shame. Not because he followed in my footsteps, but because he didn't. He built his own. Stronger, wiser, cleaner. One morning at the cabin, just before heading back, I stood by the water with a stack of old papers. Board reports, family photos, printed articles from the scandal. I burned them one by one, not out of anger, not as revenge, but as release. Every flame that licked those pages felt like a confession. I had failed to see the truth, failed to act sooner. failed the people who mattered. But I had also survived. I had drawn a line, set a boundary, chosen integrity over comfort. And that choice, brutal as it was, saved what little was left of the world I'd built. Back at the office, I moved my things into a smaller room. Let Drew keep the main office. It's yours now, I told him. He didn't argue, just nodded, set his coffee down, and got to work. I respected that. The lack of ceremony. The absence of ego. It felt right. I sat at my new desk, smaller, quieter, and pulled out a notepad. I started jotting ideas, new projects, better ethics guidelines, a mentorship program. It felt different this time. Not like rebuilding from ruins, but like planting new roots. No longer trying to preserve a legacy that had been poisoned. Just trying to build something honest, no matter how small. Sometimes people ask if I miss Leah, if I regret sending her to jail, if I could go back and do it differently. And I always answer the same way. I don't miss the version of her I now know is never real. I don't regret protecting the company. And no, I wouldn't do it differently. Because in the end, boundaries are what save us. Not love, not hope, not family. Boundaries. On the last page of my notebook, I wrote a single sentence in block letters and underlined it twice. Never again mistake closeness for loyalty. And I meant it. If this story moved you or made you reflect on the complexities of trust, family, and self-preservation, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Your engagement helps us bring more powerful, real-life stories to the surface. See you soon in the next one.